Having money tied up in a 401k can be like walking up a narrow canyon. Everything is great while you're building up your savings, but at some point you look around and wonder, how do I get out of this? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about if and when you can take a withdrawal or otherwise access the money in your 401k, how you do it exactly, so the logistics. And then if you are at retirement, we'll go over some of the logistics of actually taking income from your savings. The first question is going to be, are you even allowed to take a withdrawal? And I know that this is your money, so you should be able to get it, but 401k plans have certain rules that limit your access to the money. So we need to break that into two categories here. One of them is if you are still working with your employer or if you have left your job. So maybe you retired or you changed jobs, for example. In those cases, it's pretty easy to do. But while you're still working, there may be some opportunities, and we're going to go over those. Just a friendly reminder that this is high-level educational entertainment, and I really do suggest that you speak with somebody who's familiar with your situation, because there may be opportunities or gotchas or rule changes out there. So if you do want help, you can talk to somebody and explore working with me. Now, when you leave your job, this is easy. You are typically eligible to take money out of your 401k plan. So you would just make that request through your benefits department, or if you work for a really big company or organization, you can often contact the service provider, like whoever prints your statements or wherever the website is that you go to manage your account. You can contact them, maybe provide the instructions verbally by phone or with an online request. And in some cases, you're going to use a distribution request form where you fill out your instructions. But there are some potential pitfalls of taking money out of your 401k, so you really want to weigh the pros and cons carefully. I do have a separate video that covers that, but basically you want to look at the fees and expenses of whatever you're moving the money to versus where you're taking it from, and then any other restrictions or features that might be important to you as you make that decision. Then there's also a timing issue. It can take a lot longer than we want to actually get this done. And the reason is that your employer and a plan administrator may need to actually approve your distribution request. So depending on how long it takes them to do that, it can take a couple of days and it can even take longer. Sometimes it's quick, but just be aware that especially with disorganized places, it could take longer than you hope. And if you are married, your spouse may need to sign off on it. So depending on the logistics of that, it's something to be aware of. Now we're going to talk about while you're still working, and we'll get back to, at the end of the video, some pointers on actually taking income if you are retired and getting ready to do that. When you're still working at your job, there are a couple of ways to get money out of a 401k, but they're typically optional features. So it depends on whether or not your employer decided to offer these features. So it might not be available. The first thing to do is to verify if any of these options are even feasible for you. One of the features you might have available is a loan, and that's where you can borrow up to $50,000 or 50% of your account balance, whichever is less, and then you repay that typically over 5 years, and there are some differences here and there, but that's the gist of it. The issue with that is that you need to be able to keep repaying that loan, and if you change jobs or leave your job, get fired, whatever the case may be, before you can repay that loan, it can be problematic. That's because the IRS might treat that as a distribution to you. And if that happens, that is taxable, and it may have an additional 10% penalty tax on top of the income tax you have to pay. So loans can be nice because you get to pay the money back, and there are no tax consequences when you use them, unless you don't pay the loan back for whatever reason. The next option might be a hardship distribution, and that's where you're going to actually request and apply for that distribution, and you submit, let's say, a form to your employer where you indicate what your reason is for taking that distribution. It might be medical expenses, might be the purchase of a primary residence, that sort of thing. But you have to give a reason, and there's a list of reasons, and your employer has to approve that. and agree with your reasoning. And unlike with a loan, this is not something that you get to repay. It's a distribution that just happens and it's done. So it's irrevocable and it's going to be taxable income to you. So you need to be aware of all the different potential tax consequences of taking a hardship distribution, but it can be a nice safety valve. The next option is an in-service distribution. Again, this is an optional feature that you might or might not have available. Typically, it's available only to those after age 59 and a half if your employer offers it, and with that, you could potentially just take money out. Again, that's going to be taxable, or what you can do is move that money into an IRA. If, for example, you're unhappy with your 401k plans investments, maybe they're expensive, maybe they don't do very well, whatever the case may be, the in-service distribution may be an option for you. And another thing that a lot of people don't know about is if you have rollover money in your 401k, you can potentially take that right back out. So that would be the case if you had, let's say, a previous job's 401k and you rolled it into this job's 401k. That's rollover money that you might have access to at any time for any reason if you want. But again, the question is, what do you do with it? You might have taxes due on it. Just have to be very careful with what you do with the money. Now, just a couple of tips that are always helpful to know as you navigate this. One is going to be about tax withholding. If you get a direct payment to you, then there may be 20% mandatory tax withholding. So be aware of that. This isn't with loans, for example, but let's say you took rollover money back out and they pay it directly to you because you're going to spend that money. You may have 20% withheld automatically. And that might be more than you need withheld. It might be more than you want withheld. So you need to be careful about how exactly you do this. If you move the money to an IRA instead, you can typically dodge that 20% withholding. So if you're in a much lower tax bracket or you really need all of that money at once, then consider moving it through an IRA first. Next, people often ask about Roth savings. So if you have some Roth 401k money, in addition to your pre-tax money or your employer money, how does that work? Well, typically you're going to roll your Roth 401k savings into a Roth IRA. So that way you keep it like to like money. And again, you may not have to pay taxes when you take those withdrawals as long as you satisfy all of the IRS rules. Something to be aware of is that you don't necessarily have to take the whole chunk all out at once. If you don't need to spend all of that money right now, or in this tax year, consider taking it out more slowly. The reason is if you take out, let's say, a couple $100,000, you might bump yourself up into quite a bit higher tax rate. That could also impact whether or not your Social Security is taxable. It could impact how much you're paying for health care. Even in Medicare, it's a couple years down the line, or it might affect if you qualify for subsidies. So it's really important to be careful about how much you take out and how quickly. So if you don't need it all at once, then consider slowing it down. And once again, want to remind you that it can take longer than you want. So just be prepared for that and maybe ask how long you should expect to wait. Now let's talk about what happens when you want to actually take income. Let's say you're retired and you're going to start spending this money to live. The way most people do this is they move the money over to an IRA that they control. And that way you can set up, let's say, monthly distributions to yourself, kind of to replicate your paycheck, or you can take out lump sum distributions as needed, but you don't have to wait for all the signatures and go through the 401k and your employer. So that's what most people do because it's easiest. Some 401k plans don't allow for that kind of flexibility. So they might say you have to take it all out at once. So doing those combinations of, let's say, the one-time and the lump sum isn't going to work from a 401k, but you can always ask. Then comes the question of how do you actually spend down the money? And there are a couple of approaches here. One is what you might just call a withdrawal strategy. So you take the money, you invest it in a way that's appropriate for you. Maybe that's a mixture of investments, and then you take withdrawals from that portfolio. Some people call that the 4% rule, for example. And I've got other videos on that, and maybe 4% isn't the exact perfect number, but it's the general idea that you're taking a small amount from your savings each year and maybe adjusting that for inflation. Other approaches include using guaranteed income, so that might mean annuities, and there are a lot of pros and cons of doing that, but it does allow you to sort of take some things off your plate. Just be very careful and be sure you understand all of the advantages and disadvantages. You can also consider bucketing strategies where you say, I've got this my cash for the next couple of years, and then a relatively safe bucket, and then a higher risk bucket that I'm not even going to touch for the next 10 years, so I can go ahead and invest it and ignore it. Again, that has pros and cons. It tends to be a little bit cash heavy, and you can always use a combination of strategies, so you don't have to pick just one. You can do a little bit of withdrawal strategy, maybe do some guaranteed income or bucketing, but the point is you don't have to pick just one. You can customize something that fits exactly what you need. Then as you're going through all of that, you want to be mindful of taxes. And I've got some videos that talk about taxes. You can find those down in the description. But the point is, you might have taxes withheld from every distribution you get, or you might find some other way to pay those taxes. By the way, if this information is helpful, please leave a quick thumbs up. That lets me know that this information is useful to people like you. So thanks and take care.